Good afternoon. I will say a couple of words as an introduction on behalf of Andrius Kubilius and Rasa Juknevičienė, the MEPs who are still currently voting and unfortunately unable to make it to the very start of the event. They will be joining shortly. In the meantime, let me welcome the other speakers who have joined, most importantly, the co-author of the book that we are presenting today, Mr. Anders Aslund. Thank you very much. I hope we will be able to start with you this afternoon to hear from you about your thoughts and Andrius's thoughts about Ukraine's reconstruction, reform, EU integration, and how both Ukraine and the West could and should approach all of these processes together in short, medium, long term for success of both Ukraine and Europe. We also have here a few other renowned speakers who will share their thoughts and their comments on this book. So most importantly, Pavlo Sheremeta, the former Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine. And we also have Vladyslav Rashkovan, the alternate, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Executive Director at the IMF, representing 15 countries, if I'm not mistaken, including Ukraine. So thank you very much for joining. And just a few rules for the housekeeping. I would like to ask everyone to keep yourselves muted if you are not speaking. You are free to unmute yourself if you want to say something. But I would like to ask to give the floor to the speakers while they speak, and after that we will open for Q&A, where you will be able to either raise your hand or you can write in the chat that you would like to speak, and the moderator will give the floor. So now, without any further ado, please, Mr. Aslund, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julie. And let me just show the book that we have just published. We have published it very fast with our think tank Free World in Stockholm, and it's available as a PDF. So if anybody wants it as a PDF, happy to send it for free. I hope you can handle that, Julia. And this book is not intended to be very original. It's rather intended to drive the policy action relatively fast, but trying to stick to the consensus. I think that the first piece of the consensus was the CEPR report in April, last April. And I would also strongly recommend the case report on the same topic that is just out now. So these are the main broad thoughts. And I would like to bring out our main thoughts in this book. The general underlying thought is that three processes should go in parallel. That is Ukraine's reconstruction, reform, the structural reform that remains to be done, and EU accession. That these three should not be treated as separate stovepipes, but as one process. And there are five main thoughts that I would like to emphasize in our book. The first is that there needs to be one clear Western and Ukrainian organization for running this process. And as it has developed now, it has very much been under the auspices of G7, a triumvirate of one representative for the EU, a Director General, and in the EU Commission, and a Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economics for the US, and the Ukrainian Minister of Finance. This makes sense. And it's important that it's open, as the G7 intends, so that all the relevant supporters of Ukraine can be represented. And this needs to be tightened up. The mandate of this reconstruction agency needs to be clarified. A strong and accountable executive needs to be formed. And there needs to be a financing fund that can become operative to receive and disburse funds with appropriate auditing. So that's the first point. The second point is where to get the financing. And we are adamant that the financing should be Russian war reparations. War reparations are standard. In the after the war that Iraq started against Kuwait in 1990, Iraq was forced to pay $52 billion of reparations, and it has done so. There's no reason that Russia should get away from it. The World Bank, in its latest assessment, put reconstruction and recovery at $411 billion. Russia must pay this. And the UN General Assembly established that in November. The G7 has, of course, concurred. How can this be done? According to the Russian Central Bank statistics, it had $316 billion of reserves in 7 Western central banks at the beginning of last year. Incredibly, none of the Western central banks have recognized this, and the European Council, the Council of the European Union demanded that the member countries should come clean and declare what Russian funds they have 3 weeks ago. And this must be properly done, 1 month ago. And it appears as if the central banks in the West feel more solidarity with the Russian central bank than with the nations. This must not be. Central bank independence must not be independence from the nations. It's from the political process. And this money should then be confiscated. People say, but there's no legal act for that. No, such legal acts need to be adopted. And that's what the EU lawyers should be doing now. And I hope that the US Congress will adopt such a law. The third point is that the post-war rebuilding of Ukraine must not become a mechanical reconstruction, but it should be insurance. And that is that each legal subject that has lost assets should be given compensation for the losses from these Central Bank of Russia confiscated assets. And at the same time, the West should promote political risk in insurance. And we also argue that the EU should start accession process in this year. Because and this is very much Andrius' argument from the process of Lithuania's accession to the European Union. For Lithuania, it took about 3 years to negotiate the accession. So first, you have 2 years or so in order to get the accession mandate and the accession negotiation going. Then the actual accession negotiations, 3 years, and then 2 years for ratification. So Andrius argues that this means that Ukraine can ideally become a member of the European Union by 2029. And then we come to the final point, which are the main conditions that Ukraine should fulfill. We think that the European Union has very nicely brought forward the right conditions. That is essentially rule of law. the 7 conditions that the EU has formulated for Ukraine. The 4 top are all about rule of law. And you can say that they aim at establishing a private property right in Ukraine. And I would emphasize the 2 most important: clean out the constitutional court, where 11 out of 15 judges have persistently voted for corruption, regardless of law. And the other is to clean out the top of Supreme Court of Justice that appoint judges. And it is about as bad as the Constitutional Court. So in order to build rule of law, you have to start from the top. It's often said that the EU was too fast when it came to Bulgaria and Romania. Our point is rather that the EU was too soft and not targeted enough on what is really important. A country that wants to become a member of the European Union needs to comply with the EU values, so that we don't get problems as we have had in Bulgaria and Romania, where they seem to be resolved, or in Hungary, where things are going in the wrong direction. So our idea is the EU and Ukraine should work closely together and get it done. And it's also very important that the US has a big role in this development. And as well as the other big Western countries, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Japan, and also Norway, and which is an important donor, and Switzerland and other countries. I think that I end with this if Andrius has arrived.
Thank you very much for your introduction and the presentation of the book. I do not think Andrius is here yet, as far as I can see. So my suggestion would be to move to the comments. First of all, of the 2 speakers who have prepared to comment on the book. As I understand, they have read the book or have had a chance to look at the book already. I also see that Mr. Vadym Halaichuk is connected. He's a member of the Verkhovna Rada. He noted that he might be available to make a few comments, so perhaps afterwards we will be able to hear from him as well. But right now, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Pavlo Sheremeta, former minister of Ukraine, for his comments. The floor is yours. I think you are unmuted.
Yes, I am unmuted. Thank you, Julija, and Anders. Thank you for the effort and for the I believe a great book. I did read it. Well, it's not. Thank you. It's not too long, and it's pretty concise, and it's up to the point. It's easy to read. The points are clear. So it was a pleasure to read, and it was, I should say, a quick read. At the same time, it's quite a meticulous and diligent effort, to go into history and to list some of the papers and to give the trajectory. Of course, the developments are much faster than the business of publishing books. So I guess Vladyslav Rashkovan, my friend, will update us on the information about the new IMF Ukraine program, because the information in the book is already a little bit obsolete. But at least you push IMF and our friends colleagues at IMF in the right direction, which they took, not only because of your advice, but of the common understanding of the situation. What I also like about the book is that it stresses, unlike many other publications up to now, stresses the role of the private sector and the initiative of the private sector in pushing the reconstruction and reform and renewal, and even the EU accession in many ways forward. It's this creative destruction, if I may quote Joseph Schumpeter here, that Ukraine lacked before 2021, 22, in comparison with our neighbors to the west. Because, of course, Poland, Baltic countries, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, later on it's Romania and Bulgaria, they kind of, they abandoned this unnecessary communist heritage that Ukraine was still clinging on to for quite some time. And that was one of the reasons why we were late. Well, there could be, of course, other reasons as well. It's still the largest country in Central and Eastern Europe, with its unique history and heritage. It was not so easy, of course, to reform it. But its creative destruction is something that we needed, that we were lagging. Now, as I say, Putin took care of the latter part, the destruction part. So it must be maybe even easier now to create, to push this forward. By the way, in a very interesting twist of history, Joseph Schumpeter wrote his first book on theory of economic development in the city at that time called Chernovice. It was part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, but now, of course, it's the city of Chernivtsi in Ukraine. 110 years ago, he used the term of creative destruction already being in Harvard 30 years later. But the ideas of innovation and entrepreneurship, I would say, were born, from Schumpeter, but in something which is now Ukraine. So the aura of entrepreneurship and innovation is there, I would say. And actually, you mentioned, especially these new industries, as you say, the service industry, the IT industry, which managed to grow. By the way, IT industry managed to grow. The numbers that we have, it was plus 21% for the first half of the year, last year, 22. Then the growth went down for obvious reasons, but still growth. It could be 10 to 15% growth that I guess we recorded in the IT industry, despite the fact that the whole economy, of course, collapsed by 30%, as you mentioned in the book. Concluding, I would say that it's paraphrasing Bill Clinton. Let me say the following: there is nothing wrong with Ukraine that cannot be cured with what is good with Ukraine. And you mentioned these advantages that Ukraine brings to the European Union on pages 14 and 18. But then, there's the paragraph that I like a lot is on the page 99, when you say that, and I quote, that yet in practice, economic freedom has been little appreciated by any Ukrainian government, which is a major reason for the excessive corruption in Ukraine and some other vices that we mentioned here. Edmund Phelps, the Nobel Prize winner, connects economic freedom and innovation. I'm trying to connect, all my dots in my short speech. So if you're boasting here the private sector and its role, because again, the government support and international financial support, I would leave it to Vladyslav to comment. He is much more competent on that. But the private sector needs entrepreneurship and innovation. And as Edmund Phelps would say, it needs economic freedom. And basically your text, Aslund and Andrius, is a lot, how to ensure this economic freedom in Ukraine. Because where we do see this economic freedom, and these are these new sectors and new industries, we see a lot of innovation, we see a lot of entrepreneurship, we see a lot of growth, and that's actually, that's the light at the end of the tunnel. That's, if I would quote another, unfortunately late professor from Harvard Business School, Clayton Christensen, he said that pushing in resources into developing countries works not as good as pulling in resources. So in Ukraine, it has to be both. Of course, it has to be a very significant international assistance. It has to be the use of the Russian assets that you, by the way, so meticulously point out how this can be done. And I think it's a major contribution, especially on this level of discussion, and thank you for that. It's as opposed to technical legal discussion, of course, it's there as well, But for the layperson reader, the way to get these Russian assets and the reason, the rationale for that is very clearly described in your book, and I absolutely agree with you. But in addition to that, there should be a strong pooling in of resources from the Ukrainian private sector, and it's something that we are very much concerned here in Ukraine, and we are trying to push on at least two levels, on as I mentioned, the private sector level, but also municipality level. Something that you mentioned as well as a good result, as a good byproduct of decentralization and structural reforms. The administrative reform, the decentralization. We have a very active in many parts of the countries, municipalities and mayors, and entrepreneurship actually is pretty much it's a local phenomena. So instead of just developing the national policies, which are important and needed. It's good that Ukraine got the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of innovation last week. But in addition to that, there should be a vibrant, very proactive, I would say even hyperactive municipal sector that drives entrepreneurship on its localities. And this entrepreneurship pulls in resources. In addition, you mentioned in the book that Ukraine underinvests. It invests 15 to 20%. It has to be, you say, at least 30%. But this cannot be achieved just by the help from outside. There has to be an internal effort. And thank you for stressing this out as well. And thank you for everything that you're doing for Ukraine and in Ukraine and in other countries. Thank you, Andrius and Andrius.
Thank you, Pavlo.
Thank you very much. And I can see that Andrius has already managed to run back to his office. If you have already caught your breath, I can give the floor to you, or would you prefer for us to continue with the comments?
Julia, you should continue. I will jump in immediately. I will, okay. Sorry for being late because of those parliamentary democracy procedures, but you should continue. I will jump in immediately.
There was a consensus that voting is very important, so I think we don't mind that you fulfilled your duty. And now then let me give the floor to Mr. Vladyslav Rashkovan, representing the IMF here in this discussion. Please share your impressions on the book, on the question of reconstruction, the financing, of course, and the possibility to continue to join all of these three processes together as has been proposed by the book. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Julia. I would say not only voting is important, but democracy is super important. And that's why voting is one of the instruments of democracy. And we all remember, some words in Russian parliament when they say that parliament is not a place for arguing. I think in democracy, your role, Andrius, you are playing is great, and also an example for others. Thanks again for inviting for this discussion. I fully subscribe what Pavlo said about the concise nature of the book, and I agree what Anders said. It's about more policy advice rather than academic paper, for sure. And this is what is needed now. I would say we need to go also already from policy advice to call to action. But here we have Andrius, who is a member of parliament, who has a power to do that as well. I have 5 different blocks to comment, if you don't mind. And I read the book. I liked it. I agree with many things. I may disagree with some of them, and I will try to say something now. First, I fully subscribe and I agree what Anders and Andrius are saying in the beginning of the book, that Ukraine is a European country. And I think there are not so many countries in the world when people die under the European flags. And this is important because the authors are writing about the values. And I think Ukraine showed Ukrainian behavior of Ukrainian people. Also, Ukrainian democratic nature of the country showed that Ukraine is a member of European family. And as Oksana Markarova is usually saying, hopefully will rejoin European family one day soon. So this is very important. And that's why I also agree with what is written by the authors that the reconstruction should be integrated into European accession. I would be a little bit accurate in the words of to be an essential part or to be integral part, because I strongly believe that reconstruction should be an interconnected process with European Commission, with European accession, very much dependent, but not necessarily 100% integral part. It's very simple. Despite of the willingness of Ukrainian people, despite of the many efforts of the Europeans, European politicians, to bring Ukraine, to help Ukraine to rejoin the European Union, European family, it's still a political process. A political process which is very much dependent on the willingness of many people in different countries. And despite of this willingness, despite the willingness of people in Denmark or in Netherlands or in other countries, you still need to rebuild Ukraine after the war. So therefore, this process should be interconnected, but not necessarily reconstruction should be integral. Because if tomorrow, for some reasons, there will be a pause in the accession process, you cannot pause the reconstruction of Ukraine. I think this is obvious. The second part, and I'm joining here Pavlo with thanking and appraising the work which has been done by the authors in terms of the Russian assets. I should be very frank. I'm doing myself with other colleagues also this job. I looked at the logic of the chapter. I fully agree that Russia must pay, for the reconstruction, and I absolutely agree with the words reparations. There is one problem. You cannot go from today to reparations with one step. Probably we need to start speaking about the compensations first, because, Russia, unfortunately, still did not lose the war. Absolutely, they will do it one day, hopefully soon. But until then, we cannot wait until the full defeat of Russia and later usage of the assets as a process of reparations, which usually comes after the war. And I fully agree with a comparison with a Kuwait and Iraq process. But at that time, Iraq lost very fast. From this perspective, I think we need to speak first about compensation, which Russia should be claimed, for the destruction which they do intentionally in Ukraine, and the process of this compensation. And I fully agree that the Russian assets should be a base for this compensation. Which way is there are many legal teams in the world who are working on it, and the offers are clearly mentioning some of the processes which are done also by the private sector, by the government. I think Ministry of Justice in Ukraine plays an important role. They are more or less from Ukrainian side, they lead the government effort, and pretty successfully. There is a lot of the process which is in US, in Canada, in Europe. We should admit that the process in Europe and in US, at least on my view. And sorry, Julia, I just didn't mention in the beginning. You mentioned that I represent IMF. Clearly, I cannot represent IMF on this discussion. I represent myself as more like a Ukrainian, both an analyst and a friend of Anders for a long time, and a person who respects very much what Andrius is doing as well. But there are many legal teams which are working on this job, and I'm sure that this book also will be helpful for them. But I would say, in order to make it from policy advice to call to action, people should take the chapter of this book and to put also in practice with legal actions. But as we know, the US and EU, their position is slightly different. US is more keen, to look at the private money, which is a smaller in US rather than the public money. And Europe, is my perception, is that they look more on the public money, which is not so big. Russian public money, which is not so big in Europe, but a little bit more careful with the private money. But anyway, I think this is one of the most important parts of the book is the Russian assets. The third, I like the concept of these three important processes to go together. The reconstruction, accession and reforms. Probably in my view, in my lexicon, I merge the reconstruction with reforms in another word which is named modernization. And here, the Pavlo already said, we clearly cannot achieve the full modernization of the country after the war without the private capital. And therefore, this clearly how to push the private capital there, how to incentivize it. This is clearly a topic for another book of Anders and Andrius on the next stage. The fourth element, which I want to mention, it's not a core topic of the book, but it's mentioning that there are a lot of discussions about the Marshall Plan for Ukraine. I should slightly disagree here, because I think for a while, I mean, we are not discussing the Marshall Plan for Ukraine because it looks a little in the current financial architecture, global financial architecture, which we have as of today. I think the Marshall Plan is not the right comparison model of, let's say, 1947, where all these institutions, including the Bretton Woods institutions, including the European Union, including European Investment Bank, EBRD, and others, they have not been created. Therefore, I don't think we speak about one fund, one plan, one source of money, rather than the coordination of donors. And there is an element in the book about that. And as you know, Ukraine managed to push at least G7 players and the international financial institutions to create this multi-donor coordination platform, which is still to show its more operational efficiency, but I already see how it starts working. And I strongly believe that in that commission, in that platform, there is much more added value in future for the Ukrainian reconstruction. But we should also admit that donors don't like to be coordinated. Everybody has its own flag. Everybody wants to put its flag closer to the victory, and to blame or to claim how much they have done for Ukrainian victory. I'm not against of that, but this, as you understand, a little bit not so good for the coordination itself. It becomes more rivalry rather than coordination. So Ukraine understands that and clearly pushes for the coordination on the next stage. And here I come to the IMF, because I already disagreed once with a view of which Anders, declared in his Atlantic Council article about the role of IMF. I should be very frank, not everything is visible, and this is what I said to Anders, I think, in December during our Christmas event with US-Ukraine chamber. The logic is the following. Ukraine last year got $32 billion of support, of donor support. About 40% was in grants, 60% was in loans, IMF was the third after US and European Union in terms of the supply of funds in Ukraine. The offers is saying about 2.7 billion, which is only partially correct, because there were also about 2.5 billion came from donors through IMF administrative account. But nonetheless, it's the third, after the others. And I would love to see maybe third, not IMF, but World Bank, because for reconstruction, and I would like to see also European Investment Bank, as a European, vehicle for the Ukrainian reconstruction. But I should be very frank, none of these amounts, about from 32 billion, would be available for Ukraine without, without IMF, supporting the Ukrainian authorities behind the scene. And this year, the support already by mid-February, we had the commitments from our donors, about $37 billion for Ukrainian support. As you understand, also this part has been done only with a coordination with IMF. IMF is supposed to approve a new program, for more than $15 billion in the next days. But this is not about 15 billion. And I cannot disclose you now the amount, but total commitments of donors under this program is much, much bigger. And these commitments would not be possible without IMF job. And you should understand that it is unprecedented that the fund is financing the country in the hot period of the war. And the fund had to change the internal policies in order not to look also even-handed. And this took time, but we did it, and this done was clearly by the management, by staff, by the board of the IMF. And I should be again to finish this. It was IMF was pushing other countries, and not other countries which were pushing IMF. And let me stop here. But again, it's a great book, and I see how this policy advice can be converted to the call to action. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Rashkovan, thank you very much for your intervention, also for such an in-depth overview of the financial aspect of the question. And I think I was partly joking when I introduced you as representing the IMF, but you are a speaker from an international financial institution, and that is a perspective that we really value. And I feel that this is a perspective that is often lacking in debates that we hear, at least at the European Parliament. The aspect that we feel is extremely important, but at the same time rather difficult to navigate, especially without the knowledge of behind the scenes, of what is happening behind the scenes. So thank you very much, and it's great to hear some disagreement happening here as well. I hope we will have a chance to hear from Mr. Aslund as well at the end of the seminar. But now I would like to give the floor to Andrius Kubilius, who I think has caught his breath over these past 10 minutes. And later, hopefully, if we still have Mr. Halaichuk, we can hear from him. But Andrius, now the floor is yours.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks a lot, really. Thanks a lot, Julia, that you resolved this crisis, which we had in our traditional webinar, since the parliament suddenly it appeared that they changed agenda, and things like that. So apologies that I was not able to join him from the very beginning, but it makes my job now much easier, because I am absolutely sure that all the aspects of the book were spoken out, and definitely I will start from again saying a lot of thanks to Anders for his initiative to make this book, and for majority of the job with the book, and knowing. Anders' knowledge of the region, of Ukraine, of Russia, of all our region, it's really, I think, it brings a lot of value to this book. My input, or let's say my view, is very simple. Looking into this book, I consider that this book is in some way, our attempt to put a strategy how to build Ukrainian success. So, of course, success demands, first of all, victory in the war. I hope that it will come very soon. And of course, after that, there will be, the processes which we put into the title of the book, like reconstruction, reforms, or modernization, and also, of course, accession. And accession, from my point of view, as a political process, as geopolitical process, has really a huge impact. And that's why I was always critical till the beginning of the war on European Union, that, after really quite an ambitious enlargement of European Union towards Central Europe, European Union then forgot about such an ambition. and that is why Western Balkans were suffering, and I think that also this geopolitical crisis with Russian war aggression was also in some way created by this ambivalence of European Union and not to show clear intention to have Eastern Partnership countries, and first of all Ukraine, going with an ambitious agenda of integration. But now we have different geopolitical landscape, and that is where I see really the need for us to have a comprehensive strategy how to build Ukrainian success, which is very much needed not only for Ukraine but for the whole European Union. And in my view, exactly accession or integration towards EU is one of the key factors, because if to look around, and to try to put very simple question, what made Central Europe and Baltic states successful during the last decades? My answer is very simple: integration towards EU. There are no single example in all the post-Soviet or whatever we shall call area where the countries would be able to create their own success without integration towards EU. When I'm looking 1 year back, and I'm asking myself the question again, geopolitical question. So why Putin decided to start this, criminal and totally, mad aggression against Ukraine? I'm coming to very simple conclusion. At least in my view, exactly, he became really worried and afraid of Ukraine becoming a successful country, and in such a way becoming maybe inspiration for Russian people to demand the same reforms in Russia, democracy, modernization, and so on, which would be really totally dangerous for autocratic Kremlin regime. So success of Ukraine, of course, it will take time, but in my view, now I consider that exactly this decade I call to myself a decade of Ukrainian success. One, we need to build that success, and that is why this decade will have, all our strategic priorities will be connected with Ukraine, with that agenda of success, and here really, of course, all those factors like rebuilding, modernizing Ukrainian economy, and adapting into European requirements will be crucial. That is why, in some way, strategic attitude is very much, needed to have some kind of holistic view. What will be the most important challenges, from where the finances will come, how those finances should be spent, what kind of reforms Ukraine will need to go. Of course, there is also the question how to push European Union to have clear political will really to go for such a ambitious agenda of enlargement. But I hope that also European Union is starting to make some geopolitical conclusions, what was wrong till the beginning of the war, and why this ambitious agenda of enlargement is very much needed. So I am quite optimistically looking at negotiations for membership in EU for Ukraine, and of course for Moldova, maybe Georgia, which Georgia is a little bit separate case, will be started at the end of this year. And I am dreaming that accession process will come back to ambitious calendar, which means, for example, for us negotiations were continuing for 3 years. For Poland it took 4 years back in the 1990s. So if we should consider that Ukraine is in some way similar to Poland in its size, of course with some additional problems, but nevertheless, if we shall take 4 or 5 years for negotiations, then at the end of this decade, I am optimistically hopeful that Ukraine can become a member of EU. So that's as I say is a very clear strategic goal, which again and again I will repeat is very much needed not only for Ukraine, but it's also very much needed for the European Union, because success of Ukraine can have a crucial influence on also on transformations in Russia, as a really good example and inspiration. And transformation in Russia really can bring totally different landscape for the whole European continent. And I stop here. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you very much, Andrius. So now I think we can move to the Q&A session to hear from the audience. A couple of remarks I would like to make before we do that. First of all, if you would like to ask a question, you can either raise your hand, so there's a raise hand button that you could press, or please write in the chat and I will give the floor to you. Also, I have added the link to the book, to the PDF of the book in the chat, so you can all find it, download it, take a look at it right now or later. And but before we start with the questions from the audience, I see that Mr. Halaichuk is connected. He is driving but willing to speak, so please, you have the floor. Mr. Halaichuk is the member of the Verkhovna Rada, who is, as I understand, currently on a mission within Ukraine, but was following the seminar. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I stopped driving, so no worries about that part. Thank you for the invitation. The great book, great idea to sort of put together all these thoughts, which are very important for us here in Ukraine, coming from experts who have been following Ukraine, but at the same time have this outside perspective to understand well what Ukraine needs and to be our lobbies and our allies in the world, if you want. It is especially important with different government and parliaments and financial institutions upon which help we depend very much. And enough was said about it. But it's also very important for us to have these discussions, to have this exchange of information, so that we are very clear in our communications what's really needed, why we do things we do, and every now and then we do that here in Ukrainian parliament and in the government, which things which raise eyebrows, even from our very, very good friends. And we always appreciate this opportunity to provide the explanations. Completely, as a member of parliament working in the European Integration Committee, I completely support the idea that European integration is crucial for success of Ukraine in general. And in ending in the right way this war and structuring the reconstruction efforts. Ukraine has been on the European integration path for some time, so we have a pretty clear idea of where we are and where we need to go. And of course, our partners in the European Union also have been following this process for many years, and they also have very clear idea of what's happening. But the challenge now is, of course, the war in Ukraine, which created all these challenges that we need to deal with right away. And quite often, those go against certain European standards and Ukraine's obligation. And this is where I think we need to have more discussions and put more effort into assessing where Ukraine has sort of stepped away from its obligations under the association agreement, first of all, and what do we need to do in those particular cases. European Union is about standards and about regulations. And when you need to make quick decisions, when you need to implement fast a lot of decisions, of course, regulations sometimes can get on the way. I'm just coming from a very interesting event in Bucha, a city that is world known now for all the atrocities that Russian troops have committed there and the destruction that it suffered. I was very pleased to see a pretty comprehensive plan that the local authorities, with the assistance of different international partners and very active civil society, have put together for reconstruction of Bucha. Detailed assessment of different projects, infrastructure, how do you restart entrepreneurship in the city? How do you bring back people who left Bucha? What needs to be done in the education sector, so on and so forth. But there we also had a little discussion as to how much regulation they can withstand at this point in time, how much overseeing of their operations. How do you do this division between what the central government does and what the local government is left alone to do, if you wish. I was told this interesting story about the hospital which got a generator, and it was donated to them. And donors were approached with a request from the director of the hospital for a little more money to connect the generator. And generator was a very expensive thing, and the money that the doctor was asking for was, or director was somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 euros. And the donors were a little puzzled. They asked, "Well, we just donated, this very expensive generator. Can't you find the money, use your own money to do the connection?" No, he couldn't. In order to connect, he needed to go through certain procedures, conduct tenders, choose the people who would do it, and so on and so forth, which would take him weeks. He didn't have weeks. He needed to conduct operations in the place which didn't have the electricity. He had hours to connect the thing. We resolved the issue, but it's just a little example of how important it is to understand our context in terms of what we can and what we cannot do, what we need to postpone. We also discussed this issue that, for example, we in the parliament now have about a European directive regulating public procurement procedures, and the need for us to step away from the standards. For example, the change of the price for the contracts. The prices for goods in Ukraine have changed drastically from the beginning of the war. So here you have a situation where a lot of contracts are now are not being implemented due to the need to change prices, but at the same time, the regulation does not allow for that. And we considered making changes in the law which governs the procedure. But again, the European directive does not allow you to change more than 15%, for example, of the initial price. In our case, we have seen the necessity to change 50% and sometimes more of those prices. So this is an important part where we need to have closer look at the necessity to depart from the European standards, the necessity and the obligation that we have to explain very clearly to our partners the reasons for that, set the times, the terms for such department, and when we would need to come back. But this very close communication hopefully will help us to achieve that result, where we are able to explain why we do what we do, or what it is that we need to do, and have the support in the European Parliament, for example. And our my dear colleague Andrius will confirm on that. I'm sure we have our very good friends who have helped us a lot in terms of different political decisions which were made. And recently we have started this project where the European Parliament and Verkhovna Rada would run this joint project between the committees in the two respective parliaments on overseeing the reconstruction of Ukraine in general. What budget instruments do we have? What legislation we use? What changes to this legislation we need to make? What are the best practices in the European Union, and so on and so forth, so that we exercise this parliamentary oversight, but at the same time don't create more problems than there already are for the government, for the local governments, for business community in their efforts to do the speedy and efficient reconstruction of Ukraine. I'll stop at this. I'm eager to follow the discussion further on, and thank you very much for for the book, for this event, and for all the help and assistance we're getting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Halaichuk. I think we all really appreciate it that you found the time and the possibility to connect, regardless of the circumstances. And I think this is yet another beautiful illustration of how we really need to adapt and change our habits sometimes in these circumstances to make it possible. And so thank you very much for stepping in and sharing your views. Now we can move to the Q&A part, and I see we have one hand raised already. Marek Dabrowski would like to ask a question, make a comment, so please, the floor is yours. For everyone else, you are also very welcome to raise your hand. I think we could collect a few questions right now, and then we could hand the floor back to the panelists to answer them. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you very much. Marek Dąbrowski, Bruegel Case and Central European University. This is a great book, and as far as I managed to go through its content in a relatively short time, I think it's very important for just repeating and repeating what should be done in case to help Ukraine and in case and to consolidate European and Western community around this country. We still need various kind of support and stimulation. I just would like to make three comments, two related to what Andrius Kubilius taught, and one related to Ukraine agenda. I fully agree with Andrius about his, I would say, critical comments on the past European policy and practice vis-à-vis enlargement. And this equally applies not only to countries of Eastern Partnership, which were practically until a year ago denied any kind of European integration perspective. And one could imagine that perhaps if EU could start, for example, European neighborhood policy in Eastern Partnership earlier than it did, if could issue at least the declaration which it issued in 2003 to Western Balkan countries. Perhaps the developments, geopolitical developments, would be different. So I think that this kind of outer reflection is needed. Whether the attitude of incumbent EU member states will be now different, I hope so, but I am not fully sure, because unfortunately contemporary politics is so much involved in solving some local and very short-term issue, and sometimes lacks a broader perspective, a longer-term perspective. Second, I also fully agree with what Andrius taught and also what he practiced about the thinking about future of Russia. It's of course very, very distant and a bit surrealistic perspective for many now, but I deeply believe that at the very end, without fundamental political transformation in Russia, we cannot think about a really safe European continent in the world. And third thing is what concerns Ukraine reforms and its road to the EU. It's a lot of blueprints, both Ukrainian ones, like for example, case blueprint with the main author who is also present here, Dmitro Boyarchuk, and Paris report, and many, many other, including also Andrius and Andrius book. And I fully understand that reforming country which is in dramatic war is not easy, but still I think some things can be done now, like building foundation for the rule of law and reforming judicial branch of government. And this will very much determine the speed of accession, because I am very much in favor of accelerated way of accession, EU accession for Ukraine, but still some alignment of mechanisms, of rules of law must happen. And I think that at least clear declaration of the Ukrainian authorities, president, government, parliament, that we think about this agenda, that we'll do it as quickly as we can, partly now, partly when once war ends, will help very much the speed of this accession. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your intervention. Is there anyone else willing to take the floor to ask a question, to make a comment? I don't think I see any other hands raised at this moment. Just to give you a few seconds to change your mind. No? I think we can head back to the speakers then, if there is no one else willing to ask or comment. There is no obligation, of course. How should we do this? Anders, would you like to speak?
I suggest that Andrius responds to the points that Marek just made, and then I'm responding to the points that Pavlo and Vladyslav made before.
Yeah, well, I can, I can just, very short remark, because I agree absolutely with Mr. Dombrovsky on, first of all, on the policy of enlargement, which I agree that, and I am repeating, using my position now in European Parliament, that really, it's, if you look back, that was one of the principal mistakes, not to offer membership perspective as early as possible for, other Eastern Partnership countries. Because when I'm, somebody saying, well, you Baltic countries or Poland or Central Europe are different people from, if you compare with Ukrainians or Belarusians or even Russians, I do not agree with that. Of course, we're different. Our language is different and our history is different. And so on and so on. But looking from a human point of view, I do not see very big difference. The only difference was that because of of historical reasons, because of non-recognition policy of the West, of our occupation back in 1940s, we got benefit to be promised membership in EU very early. Back in 1993 was Copenhagen criteria. Before that, we were showing how close we are to the failure. I mean, when, really, after we declared independence in 1990, And I remember very well the shock when in 1992, in the autumn of 1992, people voted against that political force which brought independence. Dissatisfaction with the economical situation, social situation was very deep. Nostalgia to the past, even to Soviet past, was also quite spread, especially in the countryside, and people voted for former Communist Party. Luckily, our Communist Party, changed themselves to Social Democrats and were not turning back, to some kind of friendship with Moscow. But political turmoil was very clear. The only thing which us, in some way made us to relax a little bit, it was that the same had happened after in Poland. But of course, the biggest impact was that in 1993, European Union declared Copenhagen criteria, and that was for us a message that the doors for us are open and we can go, towards EU. We can go with the process of integration, and that created our success. It stabilized us, and that created our success. But unfortunately, because of different reasons, the West, European Union, was not able at that time, to offer similar promise similar perspective to Ukraine, to Moldova, to Belarus even, and that is what really created all the problems, internal problems in those countries. Nostalgia to the past, political turmoils, non-ability to reform themselves. That is what made this big difference, which I consider as in some way, responsibility also is on the Western community side. So now we need to change that. It's very clear, if we are looking back, what shortcomings we need to overcome, especially in our geopolitical standing, and that's why I consider that really our task now is, in all the different ways, to bring back ambition into European Union, to have enlargement policy as really as very important geopolitical policy, and the policy which is very much needed not only for Ukraine but also for the whole European Union, because that is, as I said before, that is exactly, it can have positive impact on developments in Russia, and it would be really very, very wrong if we would waste time and will not use this opportunity, which really comes from this tragedy, from the war and so on, if we shall not use this opportunity also to have a clear strategy how to assist Russian transformation. But Russian transformation, in my view, is very much connected with our policy towards Ukraine, both with Ukraine integration towards EU, also with Ukraine integration towards NATO. And, with that integration, I see also, it would help Ukraine not only to reconstruct, but also to modernize itself. And that is how Ukraine can become a successful country.
Thank you. The floor over to Andrius.
Yeah, thank you very much. I very much agree, of course, with what Andrius said about the importance of the EU accession. And if you look upon one elementary thing, all the democracies in Europe have become democracies through European accession. I mean, in the post-communist countries. So the European Union is the best way of building democracy. Also good on building the rule of law, but not so exclusively. But I wanted to go back to the points that mainly Pavlo made, but also what Vladyslav said. First about the move to Europe. I didn't mention it before, but we have a big chapter at the beginning of the book on how Ukraine has moved from Russia to Europe. And often one encounters this misperception that this is how Ukraine is. Well, countries develop, and we emphasize very much how Ukraine has developed as a country, and that it has moved systematically towards the European Union. So this argument that the Ukraine is stuck is wrong. And I tend to use the Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, and Ukraine has moved since 2014 to last year from 141st rank to 126th rank. You might say that's not a big change, but it's a systematic change. Ukraine has improved every year, and it is because of reforms. And what is missing is what we emphasize and the EU emphasize, that is the judicial reforms that have to come. Another point that both Vladyslav and Pavlo emphasize is the importance of the private sector. In a war, the state tends to take over. That's typical of a war economy. And you get more regulation. And I would here actually point out, I was in Lviv on Thursday, and it's striking, you don't have any problems with supplies of goods. Everything is available. You don't have any rationing. Admitted inflation rose to 27% late last year, but now it's down to 25%. It's high, but it's not out of control. In September last year, people like me were fearful that we would see some kind of very high inflation if the West didn't come through with the financing. The West has come through with financing, and the Ukrainian Ministry of Finance is acting very responsibly, and the supply lines of functioning surprisingly well. So this economic freedom has prevailed, but it will be important when we discuss the financing for reconstruction, that it also goes to the private sector. As it is now, I visited the bombed Burstin power station outside of Kiev, which belongs to DTEK, Rinat Akhmetov's company, and they complained that all this money for reconstruction of the electricity system that is now intentionally bombed by the Russians. This power station had been bombed 6 times, and they don't get any compensation. It goes to the state. It goes to Ukrenergo, the state grid company. And it's important that the reconstruction money functions like insurance. Who has suffered should get money regardless of ownership. It can be the central state. It can be a regional state entity. It can be private people, and it can be a private company, regardless of whom the company belongs to. So I think that this is quite important. And generally, I think that what Pavlo and Vladyslav and Marek said, that I can just thank you very much for your comments, and very much appreciate them all, and don't really disagree with any of them, while I have a slightly more positive view than Vladyslav on what the IMF can do for Ukraine. But we can leave that aside. Thank you.
Now the last question to the remaining speakers. Would you like to make a brief comment at the end? Is there anything you would like to add? No, neither of the speakers. Okay, so I think with this, we can conclude the seminar. First of all, I would like to thank to all of the United for Ukraine network members who joined this event. It's also being recorded, and we will upload it, so I hope I can also thank to all those who watched it online. And of course, a big thanks to all of the speakers, the co-authors of the book, to Andrius and Anders for bringing about this opportunity to discuss this question, but also, of course, a big thank you for everyone who commented. we really appreciate it that you took the time to read the book and to share your thoughts, and to also add really valuable input from very different perspectives, highlighting the importance of the private sector, the perspective of the IFIs, and the financing, the complexities of financing the process of reconstruction. And also, it's great, I believe, for all of us to hear the view from on the ground. And what I would conclude to be the connecting thread here is that we really need to have a very comprehensive view of the process. The reconstruction, the internal reforms, the EU reconstruction has to go hand in hand. That is the bottom line of the book, I think, what we can take from it. But also what we heard from the other interventions is that it's not just Ukraine that needs to change. We also need to be sensitive to the very specific context in which Ukraine is undergoing all of this. And it's also change that is needed in many, many other circumstances, including the internal EU reforms to make enlargement possible, including many different changes that make it possible for international organizations to finance this process, for us to confiscate the frozen assets, and so on. So I guess this is a teamwork, and I can see that a seminar like this that bridges the experts, the policymakers, is one of the ways for us to make this possible. So I thank to all of you for being here, for the attention. Please read the book, and we will see you on other United for Ukraine seminars. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.